I really am excited to be here to talk to all of you. I'm excited. I don't know if you're excited, but I want to get you excited because I want to talk about things that really matter, that matter to you, but just as importantly, matter to the future of this state and this country. You guys, I mean, you hear this all the time. It's kind of a, one of those kind of corny cliches, you're the future. But you only are if you do the right things from this point forward. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. But first, I want to thank the people who made this possible. Made it possible for you to be here and made it possible for me to be here. And of course, Kitty Boone is right at the top of that list. I've had the opportunity to work with the Aspen Foundation before, the Aspen Institute. They do great things, and they couldn't do some of the great things they do with young people if it weren't for the Bezos Family Foundation. And the Bezos Family Foundation is made up of people who also care about young people and about education and about success. And so they've invested a great deal into making it possible for young people to be successful and understand what that even means. And then Denver Public Schools. How many of you are from DPS? Okay, everybody, right. I knew it was everybody, but geez, come on, wake up. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about, because they've asked me to talk a little bit about my background and how I got to be where I am, but I also understand that you already heard from Mayor Michael Hancock today. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. How would you describe Mayor Hancock?
Awesome.
Yeah, pretty energetic guy, right? Yeah. See, when I see him and when other people see him, or when they see me, they see a short, stocky, bald guy. So Mayor Hancock and I, when we're on the same speaking platform, and we often are, we kind of joke about whether people can tell us apart. Because we're both bald, we both have goatees, we're both short, and I would say there's a very easy and obvious way to tell us apart. I'm the tall one, right? So that's the distinction between Mayor Hancock and me. Now, he is an amazing guy, and he is an inspirational leader for me, and I hope you heard a little bit about his story, about how he got to be mayor. And, he's he like defines Denver, where he went to school, the jobs he had with the Broncos, the jobs he's had on city council, with the Urban League. He's done tremendous things that are all focused on young people like you, because that's exactly who he was. He's the same, he's just a little bit older and a little bit balder. That's the way I feel. I feel like I have been where you are. Now, I want to talk a little bit about that, but I want you to know my favorite job of all time was being a college president. I've been president at Pikes Peak Community College for 5 years, at university, at the Colorado State University in Pueblo for another 4.5. And what I loved about being on campus was I was always around young people who wanted to change their lives. And some of them did. Some of them weren't quite so successful. At both of those schools, we were really focused on students who were often first generation. That is, students whose parents had not gone to college. It was often focused on students who were lower income or working class. It was also a lot of students who were either African American or Hispanic. Those were the students who we served, and those were the students who motivated and inspired me, because I knew that talking to them and looking at them, that many people viewed them as having several strikes against them and not likely to succeed. And yet they were determined to succeed, just as I hope really all of you are. So I want to talk about success, and I want to talk about leadership. And let me start by talking a little bit about, again, sort of where I came from. My family's from a small town in northern New Mexico that's overwhelmingly Hispanic. My father, when he started school, he didn't speak any English. He said that his name was Juan Luis Garcia. When he started school, his first day of school, someone in his family told him how to say, "My name is Johnny." And those were literally the only words in English he knew. Now, he's amazing. I'm not, because he's the one who, starting there, was able to get through a high school that didn't produce many high school graduates, and then join the Army, and then go on to college, and in fact, on to graduate school, and to raise 5 kids with my mom, who didn't go to college, also from the same small town, also a graduate of a place called Espanola Valley High School. And Espanola, anybody heard of that? Lowrider capital of the world. Many of you don't know that. Well, Espanola was a place, and still is a place, that's relatively low income, relatively small, and doesn't produce a great deal of academic success. But my folks, again, raised 5 kids, and they made sure that we all got through school. So we did. We lived on Army bases around the country, starting in New Mexico, but El Paso, Texas, in California, in Germany. I went to high school both in Fairbanks, Alaska, and I graduated from a school called T.C. Williams High School. Has anybody heard of that one? T.C. Williams Titans? Remember the Titans? Denzel Washington? That was the school I was at, and that is when I was there. So it was an interesting environment. And then my first college experience was as a summer program at Howard University. Has anybody heard of Howard University? Right. What is Howard, right? It's an HBCU, a historically black college or university. Okay, so I graduated from a high school that was predominantly African American. My first college experience was at a historically black college. And so it's no wonder I'm kind of screwed up here. I mean, there's weird identity issues. But I did come to school out here in Colorado. And what I found when I arrived here is that I was completely unprepared for college. Not just academically, but really, I didn't know what I was getting into. I felt completely isolated and lost, and I quickly ended up on academic probation. And I stayed there for my first year and my second year until I kind of figured out that I did not want to be one of those statistics, one of those Hispanic students who came to CU in the 70s, lasted a semester or two, and washed out. And I found another group, a whole group of Hispanic students who also wanted to succeed and wanted to see me succeed. And I surrounded myself with people who wanted me to be successful, just as I wanted them to be successful. And we helped each other along. And I went from academic probation to dean's list by the time I graduated. But I still didn't know what I wanted to do. What I had been doing before college and while I was in college in the summers is I did work for Mayflower Van Lines. I started out as a loader and a packer and eventually as a driver, crew leader, and I decided to go back to truck driving after I got out of college. It was something I knew how to do. It was something I was good at. And so I was working for a Mayflower agent in the Washington, D.C. area. I wanted to do cross-country stuff. I wanted to make it a career, so I applied to something called Mayflower Interstate School. But at the same time, because I had an interest primarily in civil rights that was built by me kind of focusing on what was happening when I was in college, when few minority students were being successful, I also took the law school admissions test, just on a whim. Just kind of showed up one Saturday when they were offering it and took it and waited to see what my scores were. And then I went to work for Mayflower. And I applied to law school, just again, because people, when they saw my scores, said, you know, you ought to apply. You did well. So I applied to the only law school I'd heard of at the time, and I heard of it because it was on TV and the movies, and that was Harvard Law School. And so, while I was working for Mayflower Van Lines, I found out in the same week I got 2 envelopes. One saying I'd been admitted to Mayflower Interstate School in Indianapolis, Indiana, and one saying I'd been admitted to Harvard Law School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Now, which would you do? That's not that easy, actually, right? I mean, Harvard Law School takes 3 years. It's really hard. It's really expensive. Mayflower Interstate School takes 3 weeks. It's in Indianapolis, party town. Okay, maybe not exactly. And they pay all the expenses. And 3 weeks later, I'd be right back to work. I had to think about that. I had to think about it because I didn't have a lot of financial resources. And I had to think about it because I didn't know if I was good enough or smart enough or capable enough. But enough people around me said, when you get an opportunity, take it. If you get an opportunity, even if you don't succeed, you've tried. Do your best. And so I applied, I showed up, I accepted, and I went to Harvard Law School, and my life has been completely different. My life is different because I got a college education and a law school education. When I look at my cousins, when I talk with my cousins, when I go back to Espanola now and talk to my cousins who didn't graduate from high school and didn't go on to college, I tell you, my life is very different than theirs, and as you would expect. Right? I have opportunities because I stuck it out. And they have the same blood, the same genes. They're every bit as smart. They're every bit as capable. But they didn't stick with it. And so the most important message I want to give to all of you is stick with it. It's not always easy. It's not supposed to be. If it was easy, everybody would do it. But you can do it. You know it because you've been selected to participate in this program. And not everybody gets selected to be in this program, right? Now, how many of you are straight A students? Okay, boo to all of you. Because yeah, it's easy for you to be assessed. No, that's great. It is wonderful. And that's a great start, and stick with it. But some of you may not be straight A students, and so you may think you can't do what the straight A students can do, but I'm here to tell you, you can. Maybe it's harder for you, And maybe you don't get straight A's, and maybe you get a bunch of B's and the occasional C. But none of those things are disqualifiers for the life you want to live. So anyway, I went to Harvard Law School. I came back to Colorado. I practiced law, and I got very interested in public education issues. And here's why. It's very simple. I married a woman back east who I met when I was in law school. She was African American. And so my kids are biracial kids, Hispanic, African American, and they all call themselves something different. One of my kids describes himself as Blaxican. You know, my daughter says she's Half-African. You know, they have all these different terms, but to them, it doesn't really matter much. It doesn't have the impact on them that it might have had on me 40 years ago. All of you, there are probably many of you who are multiracial, who are biracial, or who people don't know what you are. And maybe you have a hard time defining for yourself. How many of you define yourselves as multiracial? Anybody? How many of you define yourselves as black? And how many of you describe yourselves as white? How many is Hispanic? Okay. What does it all mean after all? What matters often is how other people see you. Because sometimes people who identify as one thing are seen as something else, but what's key is not allow yourself to be seen as, whatever your race, as being somehow less capable and less deserving. And that's a danger. That's a danger because race, whether we agree it's biological or a social construct, we know it has an impact. It doesn't have the impact for you that it did for me, and it doesn't have the impact for me that it had for my parents and grandparents. But it's a fact of life. You have to believe that you can succeed. How many of you believe you can succeed? How many of you have doubts? Yeah. Well, you know, we all have doubts. I have doubts about this guy too. There's nothing wrong with having doubts, again, as long as you decide you're going to keep pressing forward. So when I went to law school, I practiced law, I became president of a college and a university. I worked in the Clinton administration, so I got to meet with, on many occasions, President Bill Clinton. In my current job, I've had many opportunities to sit down with President Obama. These guys are heroes to me because they also had modest starts in life, and yet they were smart and they worked hard and they succeeded. So we all have lots of heroes, right? We have heroes who are white, who are black, who are Hispanic. Name a white hero, someone you look up to. Superman, okay. Hard to top Superman. What else we got? Abraham Lincoln, a little before my time. Jesus, even more before my time. Okay, Gandhi. Gandhi, white, how about an African American leader? Barack Obama, Martin Luther King, we can name a lot of them, right? What? How about a Hispanic leader? What? Hispanic leader? Who? Cesar Chavez? Okay, now it's terrible that it had to be an African American girl to give me the name of a Hispanic leader. Okay, we had Cesar Chavez. Who else we got? Who? Corky Gonzalez, one of Denver's own. Santa Claus? Santa Claus? He's not Hispanic? See, he's short, he's fat, he sneaks in your house in the middle of the night. The point is, there are a lot of folks out there we can look up to. We can look up to people of different races and different backgrounds, and we should. We should be looking for role models all the time. And then, we should not only be looking for role models, we should try to be one. How many of you see yourselves as role models for your colleagues, for your peers, for your younger brothers and sisters? Okay, you may think you shouldn't be, but you are, whether you like it or not. People look at you, and they want to model themselves when they see you being successful. They want to model themselves after you. That is a big responsibility. So now I want to get to questions and answers soon because I really want to hear from all of you. And I know you don't want to hear me talk about myself all that much. I've done more than enough of that already. But I want to talk to you about what I do now because I've been fortunate to end up in these positions. Even though I was a mediocre student, never considered myself a great leader, never considered myself much of a public speaker. I mean, I couldn't even get a date in high school. So it's unlikely that I ended up here. And I would say to students, you know, if you get an education, you can look like me. And often when I'm at the governor's mansion or in the Capitol on the weekends and I'm not wearing a suit, people still think I'm part of the cleaning crew. But you can look like me, and if you're educated and ambitious, you can get to be lieutenant governor. And when I say that to students, some smart aleck student always says, yeah, but why would I want to be lieutenant governor? Or some other, even worse, mean student will say, why would I want to look like you? Okay, that's not the point. Point is, you can do anything if you believe in yourself and you work hard. And you get other people to believe in you. So that's what I want to talk to you about. Now, last thing I'll say, in this role, what matters to me is what we call a cycle of success. A cycle, what is the most important thing for a young person in high school for getting into college? Is it money? Yeah. Money's one thing. Motivation, right? Somebody has to believe that they have to want to do it. So if you want to do it and you have the money, is that all that matters? No, you have to be prepared. You have to be able to compete when you get there. You have to be able to do the academic hard work that it takes to be a successful college student. And when does that start? That does not start when you're a junior or a senior in high school. And too many of our efforts over the years have been focused on juniors and seniors in high school. And if you hadn't done well before now, it's too late. We need you to do well from the time before you in fact show up at the schoolhouse door. So one of the things I'm very focused on is early childhood education. How do we help parents better prepare their kids so when they show up for kindergarten for the first time, they're ready for kindergarten. When they move from kindergarten to first grade, that they're ready. When they leave third grade, to know that they are literate, that they can read and they love to read so that they can be successful in fourth and fifth and sixth grade. We really need to start from the very beginning. We need to create this cycle of success that starts with parents and families, continues through with kids through every grade in school, continues on not just so that they graduate from high school, but graduate ready for college level work, and then that we provide resources so that they can afford to go to college. I hope all of you are thinking about that, and I would say money is not the biggest obstacle. There's money out there. There are folks who want to help you. There's scholarships. You can go to college. You may not be able to go to the perfect college you want. You may not be able to live as fancy a lifestyle as you want when you're there. You may not be able to drive the car you want while you're a student. Well, that's right. You're a student. You need to suffer a little bit. But you need to be focused on being a student. So here's my advice. First, go full-time. Go, if at all possible, go to the best school you can go get into and go full-time and shoot for graduating in 4 years. Not everybody's going to be able to do that, but if you do, you're much more likely, if you go full-time, you're much more likely to graduate. We want you to finish on time. Now, we know we need to provide quality higher education opportunities. That's what we're focused on in the governor's office. We're trying to put more money into colleges and universities because putting more money into K through 12 isn't enough. We need to put money into higher education so when you finish at the great schools that you're at, doing the great work I know you're doing, you'll be able to go to school. And you'll be able to go to good school. And if you want, you'll be able to go to good school here in Colorado and get out and get a good job and then contribute back to your community. How many of you plan to contribute back to your community when you graduate from college? How many of you think you should wait that long? Right? I don't think you should wait that long. And I know you don't. That's why you're here. You're working on with these challenges, trying to solve today's problems now, when you're still freshmen and sophomores and juniors and seniors. I would say never sell yourself short. You can do all those great things. I mean, it is, let me read from you just one quote, and then I'll close and we'll go to questions. This is a quote from, who's ever heard of Bobby Kennedy? Yeah, now Bobby Kennedy, like his older brother Jack Kennedy, who was president of the United States, was very committed to making a difference and wanting to see that young people could make a difference. And he was speaking to a group of students about your age, black students in South Africa at a time when there was a very strict form of racial segregation in South Africa. And he said, look, you guys can change the world. Even though you're poor, even though you're young, even though you're not well educated, you can change the world. And he said, quote, this world demands the qualities of youth, not a time of life, but a state of mind, a temper of the will, a quality of the imagination, a predominance of courage over timidity, of the appetite for adventure over the life of ease. Now that's what defines young people, right? You're not afraid of the things that people my age are afraid of. You're not timid, you're courageous. Be courageous. You care about adventure. You don't want to live a boring existence. Not yet. There's time for that. Be adventurous. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. We all learn from our mistakes, but what can we learn if we never make a mistake? So be prepared to make mistakes, learn from them, and go on. Now I will stop there because I want to get your questions. I want to hear from you. I want to see if any of you are still awake. I want good questions. Please, let's talk. Okay. Raise your hands if you have questions, he said, and there's some mics around. And there's a mic over here. And again, any question, nothing's off limits. Yes, sir. Right there's got a mic right behind you. Tell us your name, what school you're at, and then ask the question.
Okay, so my name is Jesus Ronquillo, and I'm from Bruce Randolph. So my question to you is, how did you pay for Harvard, you know?
I'm still paying for it. No. Back then, Harvard was cheaper, but I had made decent money as a truck driver, and I always saved every dime. Now, I also had to get a loan every year. And then I worked while I was in school, and I lived just about as cheaply as one could live. I made sacrifices because I didn't want to borrow more money. But I did come out owing money. But when you come out of a school like Harvard Law School, there's a lot of people who want to hire you and pay you a lot of money. And I was happy to be hired and happy to be paid a lot of money, and I was able to pay it all back. Now, I was fortunate. I also had a father-in-law. My father-in-law was one of the first African-American graduates of Harvard Law School. And in fact, he was a professor when I was there. And my daughter, who's a little short, half black, half Hispanic young girl, she worked hard, and she went to Harvard Law School. So we think Harvard Law School doesn't admit many minorities, but here's 3 generations that managed to make it through, not because any of us were brilliant, but because believed we could do it. So. Other questions? Here, and then there's one there in the back? Okay, you're ready. You know, what does the lieutenant governor do, she asked. Well, it's a good question. My kids ask me that all the time. The lieutenant governor, for one, fills in for the governor when he's not in the state. So a lot of days I'm acting governor. Well, that doesn't really mean that much. So a lot of time, so when I was asked by this governor to be lieutenant governor, I wasn't sure I wanted to do it because I wasn't sure what the job really was. So I said I'll be lieutenant governor, but only if you also let me be the head of the Department of Higher Education. Now, that's never happened before in this state. So I'm both on the cabinet and I'm lieutenant governor. So when I talk to a lot of lieutenant governors, they don't have enough to do. I have more than enough to do. So I also, besides running the Department of Higher Education, which is over all the colleges and universities, I'm very focused. I have leadership with early childhood education and K through 12 education. I give advice to the governor on how we can do a better job in educating our young people to build the workforce of the future. I also chair something called the Colorado Commission on Indian Affairs. So I work with the tribes that are located here in Colorado. And I chair something called the Colorado Space Coalition. So I work with aerospace. So it's a wide range of things that are unrelated but are fun. And that's what I like about the job. I get to do different stuff every day, including talking to groups of young people like you. There's another question back there.
I'm Maria. I'm from Thomas Jefferson as well. And I wanted to ask you a question. So how has everything that you experienced through your lifetime changed you impacted you as a person and made you grow as a man?
Wow. Huh. Well, think about it. Everything we do every day impacts who we are and how we live our lives. Now, I will tell you, for me, it was frankly first that I struggled in school. I wasn't ever a straight A student when I was in high school or when I was my first couple years in college. And I think I was so close sometimes to failure that I'm reminded of that every day as I'm working hard. I don't want to get back there. It took too much to become successful, and I want to hang on to that. But then more importantly, because I've seen what I was able to accomplish not being the greatest student, not coming from a family with a whole lot of resources, I want to make sure, and this is my primary goal in life, to make sure that there are more kids who start out where I did who are getting to where I am and beyond. And I think that's possible. So that's what excites me. That's why I like to come to events like this, because I see the leaders of tomorrow. And anything I can say to you that just encourages you, even a tiny bit, to keep going, that's what inspires me. And it's because, again, I guess the last thing I would say is when I visit my cousins, my primos back in New Mexico, and they live in third and fourth hand single-wide trailers, and they work in gas stations, and they're raising kids who aren't going to be any more successful than they were. And I know they're every bit as smart and capable as I was. I know that there are a lot of kids out there who could end up on that path or could end up on your path. I want them to end up on your path. Thank you. Other question? Yep. My grade point average. This is getting personal. Why don't you ask what I weigh? My grade point average when I left high school was probably maybe about a 3.0, if I was lucky. Well, I didn't get into Harvard right away. I went to CU. Anybody can get in there. No, I went to CU, and my grade point average there was 1.8 for my first 2 years. Now, my second 2 years, it was more like a 4.0. And so when I wrote to Harvard, I said, forget my first 2 years. I didn't know what I was doing, and I wasn't ready. Look at my last 2 years. They are a better indicator of what I'm capable of. And so I was really trying to sell myself and saying, I've done some things well. I've done a lot of things poorly, but only look at the things I've done well. And you have to sell yourself. And back then, frankly, Harvard was a lot easier to get into than it is today. So that's, candidly, that's just true. But I was never that 4.0 student. Yes, ma'am, right over here. Who's that? Sir, I can't see in there. Yes, sir. Sorry, man. The lights.
Hey, I'm Tashawn Montgomery, a junior at George Washington High School. Are there any specific scholarships that you recommend?
Yes, there are a lot of them, actually. One of the first ones you ought to think about is the Denver Scholarship Foundation. We're working with them right now because they know it's not enough to just give students money. We have to provide support services for them after they arrive at a university or a college. So they're very focused on that sort of a hands-on approach, but that's not all. There's many, many. Here in Colorado, we've got Daniels. Every one of you should apply for a Daniels Scholarship. We've got the Betcher. Every one of you should apply for the Betcher. We've got at every single school what they call institutional financial aid. And then we've got need-based aid. Right now, the state puts about $100 million into financial aid for needy Colorado students. That doesn't begin to touch the need. But what the institutions put in is dramatically more than that. So Colorado University has its own scholarship money. And so what you have to do is build, get a bunch of different scholarships from a bunch of different sources, stack them, and it'll be possible. And you'll probably have to take out a loan or two, depending on how well you want to live. And I would say, frankly, don't try to live large. There'll be time for that. Deny yourself a few things, save a few dollars. Don't borrow more money than you absolutely have to. Because the biggest problem I see students have now is they borrow every dollar they can, and then they can't pay it back. Don't borrow every dollar you can. Borrow only what you absolutely need. And that's my best advice for you. Yes, in the back.
Well, it doesn't have to do anything with, I'm Daniela from West Campus, and it doesn't really have to do with anything you spoke about, but more personal. Throughout your life with your relationship with your wife, has anybody judged you about it? Just because you're Mexican, she's black?
Wow. It's not as common anymore. I will tell you, the first folks to judge me about it were my own parents. They wanted me to marry a good Latina girl from the valley, from the Española Valley, who could cook the food I was used to and who could talk to my grandparents in a language they understood, something I can barely do. But she was frankly better educated, had a better upbringing than I did. I was marrying up. But I think both families had to get used to that. Her father wondered about me too. He didn't know if she'd be able to cook food that I could eat. I remember the gift he gave her when we got engaged was a Mexican cookbook, like I'd never eaten anything else. My grandmother, when I told her that my wife, this African-American woman, was trying to learn a little bit of Spanish, my Spanish-speaking grandmother said, "Oh, that's great. Are you going to try to learn her language?" Because she didn't know what language black people spoke, but she assumed it was not English. So we've had to address that going on. And then when we were first in Colorado Springs, I'll tell us one story. We both like to work out in the weight room at the YMCA. And I was working out with her there one day. She was a very beautiful woman, really great great figure. Of course, that was 4 kids ago. But, sorry. She was beautiful. So I was working out with her one day, and the next time I'm back in there and I'm working out by myself, and this guy, this white lawyer, comes over and he goes, "Hey, I saw you working out with that woman yesterday, right?" He said, "Do you know her?" I said, "Yeah, I know her." He goes, "Well, you know, I know this black doctor who just moved to town, and he'd really like to meet a woman like that." And I say, "Well, I'm sure she might like to meet him, but actually she's married to me." So there's an assumption often that there's not this connection, but you guys don't have those assumptions. You guys see every kind of group together. You're used to it. Now I've got one of my nephews who's my brother married a Korean woman, so he's got a son who's half Korean, half Mexican, and tall, dark hair. He married a rather dark-skinned black woman. So baby's half black, quarter Mexican, quarter Asian, and they gave birth to a baby that looks like a little red-headed leprechaun. So it's weird, but all things are possible. I will tell you, the one thing I've learned from being married to a black woman for 32 years, and the black women in this audience will understand this, I learned a lot about hair. So, yes.
Oh gosh. I'm Cheyenne from DC 21, and I wanted to know, would you recommend going to, a regular 2-year college and then transferring to a 4-year college, or just going straight into a 4-year college?
Well, I was the president of a community college, and I would tell kids, go to a community college because you can save money. But I'm not going to say that, because as good a job as community colleges do, frankly, the graduation rate is not yet what it should be. And when we look at students with identical academic backgrounds who start at a 4-year school and compare them with kids with similar backgrounds who started at a 2-year school, the likelihood that they will graduate with a bachelor's degree is higher for the kid who starts at a 4-year school. So I wouldn't say 2-year versus 4-year. I would say go to the best school you can get into. The best school you can get into. Surround yourself with the most capable students, because what you'll find, and what I learned at Harvard, was I learned more from the smart students who were there than I did from my professors. Surround yourself with people who are ambitious, who are smart, and who want to work hard. And if you go to a 2-year school, fine, but go full-time and keep focused on that 4-year degree. Don't allow yourself to quit until you get there. More than 50% of the minority students in the United States who go to college start at a 2-year school. That's fine, but only if they finish and then go on and get that bachelor's degree they all want. That's what you need to be focused on. Yes.
I'm Brian Montez from John F. Kennedy High School. And my question is for you is, with a lot of students being undocumented, how do you think, and a lot of them very motivated, how do you think they are going to advance in their educational goals having less resources?
Well, this is really good. For 8 years, this state tried to pass a bill that would allow undocumented students who graduated from Colorado high schools to go to Colorado universities and pay resident rates. For many years, we denied them that right. Last year, we passed a bill that now allows undocumented students who've attended a Colorado high school for 3 years and have graduated to go and pay resident tuition. That's a start. That's an important start. But it's not enough, because resident tuition is still too much for some people if they're not eligible for state financial aid or Pell Grants. So what we need to do is continue to push to find out ways to provide resources for those ambitious young people to afford to go to school. They've done what they can. They've graduated. They've worked hard. They are, again, just as much a part of our future as our documented students. So why shouldn't we provide the same level of support? That's my opinion. I wanted those students when I was at CSU Pueblo, even if they were paying resident versus non-resident tuition, I wanted them because I knew they'd been successful, I knew they were motivated, and I knew they would be good role models for the rest of my students. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Rebecca West. I'm from the Denver Center for International Studies, and I was curious if you thought that arts were important in schools and whether we should include arts education in DPS schools.
Yeah. Good question. Arts education. Let's think about arts. And the arts are a lot of things, right? It's music, it's art history, it's literature, all of those things. How many of you think those things are important, an important element in education? Now, I'll tell you, a lot of folks question that because they say, how is that going to help you get a job? And isn't the point of an education to help you get a job? Who thinks the point of an education is to help you get a job? That's part of it. That's part of it, but that's certainly not all of it. We want people to be good, engaged, critically thinking citizens. And often that comes from a liberal arts education. My sister was a voice major at the University of New Mexico. And when she graduated, she worked for a while as a voice teacher. She also sold vacuum cleaners door to door. But ultimately, she went to medical school. She went to medical school with a music degree. Now she's a practicing doctor. There's nothing that limits you, but it is more challenging. You have to be more creative. And so I would say, I would encourage you to take arts courses, literature courses, history, philosophy, because frankly, those are the things that excite you. Those are the things that will make you think and inspire you and keep you going forward. If you're an engineer, great, but still read, study literature, study art. It'll just help you appreciate life that much more. I think that's the key point, the key objective of education, is to have a more fulfilling life. You can do that with an arts education, but also stay focused on acquiring the skills you need to get a job. Yes, sir. And I think we're running out of time. I don't want to, maybe I've long since ran out of time. You guys need to give me the high sign when you're done with me. Yes, sir.
I'm Will Palmquist from East High School, and I was wondering, you said earlier that your school or district in New Mexico didn't send too many people to college. How does that compare to like a DPS or schools
Well,
like DPS?
regrettably, it was worse. DPS, it's such an interesting mix. I mean, DPS, whether you're at East or Manual or TJ, you see students who are really high performers and students who you know are doomed, who are just not going anywhere. So it's not just a function of the school. But now DPS does not graduate as many of its students as it should, and it certainly doesn't graduate as many of its students of color as it should. You know, if you go to a school like East, there's incredible disparities. And they're not just racial and ethnic, they're income. We see incredible class differences. And then we see an integrated school that, for all intents and purposes, appears to have segregated classrooms. Because you see black students in the halls, but not in the AP classes. Is that what we want? We need to figure out, damn right it's not. That's right. So we need to figure out, how do we make sure that teachers understand that minority students have just as much potential? How do we make sure that minority parents understand their kids have just as much potential and deserve just as much support? And then how do we provide resources to students whose families are not in a position to provide them those resources? That's got to be our key, whether you're from a small rural district like Espanola Valley High School or whether you're from a large urban district like DPS. What? Okay, I'm getting the high sign here. Okay.
North High School. I'm Siani from North High School, and I wanted to ask you if you could go back and do one thing, change one thing, what would you change?
If I could change one thing about myself, I would be much taller. Well, I'm not sure that works. I think a little bit about the way I parented my own kids. Painful to say that, but I pushed my kids hard. And some of it pushed them forward, and some of it pushed them away. So you have to think about how you provide kind of the right amount of discipline and support and love and have high expectations, but again, are encouraging and positive and loving. And those things, the hardest thing you'll ever do, I will tell you, the hardest thing I've ever done is raise kids. And, it's just hard. And I'm sure all of you, incredibly difficult for your parents, even if you don't mean to be. So think about them once in a while, because this shit is hard. Okay, I'm done. Thank you all very much.